What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 49 of Conflicts of Interest. I am the host, Kyle Anzalone, solo on today's show, but I got a ton of news to get through. Just want to remind everybody that this week I'm only doing 2 shows, Monday and Wednesday. Should be back with the normal 3 shows a week next week. Just taking a day to celebrate Christmas here. Just want to also remind people to share the show. Find it online either at the Libertarian Institute, where I'm the news editor and also write the daily news roundup, or go to the YouTube channel Conflicts of Interest and share the video version of the show. Recommend it to people, put it in your Discord channels, on Reddit, social media, wherever you can. Get it out there to new listeners. And I really appreciate when people do that. So let's get into the news. One thing that I've been really concerned about for the past 9 months is the unintended consequences from these lockdowns. Now, I don't think they seem all that effective in doing anything really, but we're definitely starting to see some information rolling in that they got at least quite a few negative outcomes. And this story from the Associated Press highlights one of them, which is overdose deaths far outpace COVID-19 deaths in San Francisco. Now, it will be interesting to see once more data rolls in if these numbers here are reflective of the country at large, or if San Francisco is maybe a little bit of a different situation. But let's get into these numbers. A record 621 people died of drug overdose deaths in San Francisco so far this year, a staggering number that far outpaces the 173 deaths from COVID-19. That's almost 4 times more deaths from overdoses than COVID-19. Now, look, people were calling the overdoses epidemic before and saying, oh, this is a major problem, but certainly that didn't get any near the response to COVID-19. And here you have multiple times people more dying of drug overdoses, and yet we continue to lock people down. We make it harder to have successful AA type meetings for people to get therapy, meet new clinicians. Look, if you're going to go and talk to somebody about serious enough issues that it's going to make a difference on whether you decide to use heroin or not, then it seems like you probably need to have a setting where you could see your clinician's face and talk to your therapist and not through these masks. And also, this is apparently something that AA groups are having troubles with, finding places, first of all, to meet, especially now that it's winter. It's probably harder to do it at outside locations. And then also expecting that everybody's going to wear a mask and get the, same thing out of it than if you weren't. Now, the COVID deaths in San Francisco last year were 441, and that was a significant increase from the year before. And so it's not like this is a growing problem. But at the same time, you have to wonder how many additional people died in 2020. Again, either because of the limitations around being able to access treatment for, drug abuse issues that are, serious enough where people could actually die from it, or, the number of people who overdose either unintentionally or even intentionally in more of a suicide thing, because they don't have jobs, because life is terrible right now. You're told that if you hang out with your friends, you're potentially killing grandma. You're unable really to, or at least you're not supposed to go out and just hang with your friends or do really all that much stuff that's enjoyable. I mean, even places, it's not recommended that you do essentially anything inside now. And hell, if you're north anywhere in the north half of the country, it's pretty cold to do much stuff outside. And when you don't have a job, you don't have that structure in your life. A lot of people, is their job that keeps them in the structure and the routine they need. And all that is falling apart for people because of these lockdowns, and there's really no evidence that they help out at all. I know there's some people who seem to have found their life's justification and telling other people they need to follow these COVID rules and everything like that, and that seems to be what's getting them through. But if you're not interested in that, there's a lot of people that are really struggling right now, and I have to imagine the lockdowns are a big reason why. And so, when we look at maybe, you save one or two lives from these lockdowns. I don't even know if they work at all, but even if you save a couple lives from these lockdowns, it looks like you're killing a hell of a lot more people with them. With that, I want to move on to this bill introduced by the one libertarian congressman, and that is Justin Amash of Michigan, although he will be leaving office come January here. This article from Reason.com, titled Justin Amash introduces bill to end civil asset forfeiture nationwide, and Bill Binion says the practice is plainly unconstitutional. So, I mean, the headline kind of says it all here. I don't think there's any reason to assume that this bill is going to pass, especially in a lame duck section now by a representative who will not be in office come January. But, let's put it on the table, maybe increase some debate on it. Maybe some incoming congressmen will take up the cause. Maybe there's people in the House right now that'll see this, sign on to it, and then, want to push it in the future. Maybe they realize this would be a pretty big political win and a pretty easy, bill to argue for, because essentially what it's saying is that the cops pull you over on the side of the road, or if somebody sells, a couple butts worth of pot out of their grandma's house, you can't just take the house, you can't take the car. If you pull somebody over with, $10,000 in cash, you just can't take the cash. And yet this is what the police do. Not only that, in a lot of cases, it's not just that the police have to prove you are doing something guilty, or they have to give you back your cash or your property. A lot of times you actually don't have charges pressed against you, and you actually have to pay money to get a lawyer to go to court to argue for your property back. And so I mean, I don't know how many stories civil asset forfeiture stories I've talked about over the years. I've been doing conflicts of interest and foreign policy focus, but it's a lot. And like I said, they range from taking Jeeps to $10,000 to houses. People who work for churches have had their money taken. A guy that was on his way to start his new business at a recording studio had tens of thousands of dollars stolen. I believe a grandmother had her house stolen because a grandson sold about an eighth of weed out of the basement. Just crazy things like this. And if we could end this practice, it would be a great thing for the American people. I'm not optimistic that this is going to pass, but let's talk about this, and maybe in an incoming Congress or a future Congress, we could see that done. Another, I think, good news story here. It's pretty interesting. This one was put on the blog at antiwar.com by the boss, Eric Garris, and it said, Sarah Palin apologizes, call for Julian Assange to be pardoned. It's right there. If anybody wants to watch, there's a couple minute video here of Sarah Palin just talking, saying that she was wrong. She, at one point, I think, called Assange, I don't know about a traitor because he's not an American, but she said that what he did was wrong, that he shouldn't have released that information, that harmed Americans, blah blah, all the mainstream talking points about how bad Julian Assange is. And now even Sarah, I could see Russia from my front porch, Palin, thinks that what he has done in the name of journalism, and that's getting to the bottom of the issue, that this is a public really needs to hear about and benefit from. And so, look, if mainstream, I guess Sarah Palin isn't the most mainstream Republican, but I mean, even compared to a Rand Paul or Justin Amash, Tom Massey, she's a couple times ago was the vice president nominee. Everybody, of course, blames her for the loss. Where John, I want to bomb every country on the planet, McCain was a presidential candidate, and people didn't vote for that. They blamed Palin. But look, she's a Republican that has influence in the party, and she's now saying to pardon Assange. I don't know if this will mean that Trump is going to pardon Assange, but it does seem like maybe there's a reason to be somewhat optimistic about what some of the talking points of the Republican Party will be under the Biden administration. That's not to say the Republicans are suddenly, I guess, going to be calling for all kinds of progressive issues or supporting a libertarian kind of line. But if you do have people like Matt Gaetz and Sarah Palin out there advocating to pardon Assange, ending wars, ending civil asset for, like, these are all kinds of things that Republicans could sign on to. They could be a very powerful opposition party that actually is looking to pass policies that could help the American people. I know that's somewhat of an optimistic take, but again, we've seen in recent weeks, time and time again, several members of the Republican Party float these ideas that, if they're able to get them through, would be huge, partying Snowden, Ross Ulbricht, Julian Assange, among some of those topics. I want to take a quick second to thank the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde sells great CBD products that are lab tested, so you know that you're getting, real health supplements that improve your life, not just, whatever you want to buy at the gas station or head shop. They sell soft gels, Edstrats, and they have their little gummies that, you guarantee are what they say they are. So check out PalomaVerdeStore.com. Use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, when you check out. If you already are, a CBD user and you listen to this show, really consider getting your CBD products from Paloma Verde, because when you do that, you'll help out the show and you'll help out Carlos, who's a great libertarian himself, and in the age of Corona, just doing everything he can to start and run his business. And then you will, also be eating yourself a nice product. If you're not a CBD user, you could go to PalomaVerdeStore.com, click on the education tab, and see how CBD could help you. Let's get back to the show. The next story I have here is from Caitlin Johnstone, and it is quite the provocative title, and it sounds almost kind of silly, but I mean, this is where we are with the mainstream media rhetoric when it comes to Russia. The title of her article here is "The Washington Post Can't Stop Babbling About Russians Hacking Our Minds." I mean, it sounds almost absurd, but this is what CNN's Fareed Zakaria said in a Washington Post article, that the Russians are hacking our minds. And he says Russians hasn't just hacked our computer system, it's hacked our minds. And this is what he apparently believes, that Russia has actually gotten into the minds and controls the minds of American people. I'm not exactly sure. I don't think he thinks it's like a microchip thing or a hypnosis thing. I guess he would just make the, political argument or something like that. But it's quite amazing. So I'll link to the Johnstone article in the show notes page for anybody who wants to go through and read her just absolutely mock and destroy this guy for his ridiculous ideas. She goes a little bit into the allegations that Russia was behind a recent hack of the Treasury and Commerce Department. I haven't seen the evidence to say that Russia is behind that hack yet. I'm not saying it's impossible, but unless they provide evidence, I don't think there's any reason we should go around repeating that claim. Even though I'm sure that Russia, you can find reasons that Russia would have a motivation to hack these sites, especially when the U.S. is waging an economic war against Russia. But this is the message that the mainstream media wants its especially Democratic audience to think, that anybody who believes anything that's outside of the Democratic Party only does so because they're controlled by Russia. And look, if you believe that, then you don't really have to deal with the arguments that the other side is making. You don't have to think, the Republicans might have a point on this or that or something else, because, well, they're just controlled by the Russians, and so we know that they're stupid and bad. I mean, again, it's such a sad level of discourse that we've gotten to, especially on the topic of Russia, where really when anything happens in this country, people claim Russia every time. They could always compare it to Pearl Harbor or 9/11, Crystal Knot. They compare it to the Holocaust, despite the fact that Americans aren't dying. But never mind that. This is the Holocaust that Russia is waging against us somehow, and that's really what they want you to think, that Russia is this terrible threat, and it's not the case. This is a really interesting article, and I was scrolling through Netflix a couple days ago, and I thought this might be the case, but Tom Secker, I think is how you say his last name, really confirms that this is the truth. The article here from RT is titled "The Pentagon Spends Millions Helping Hollywood Movies Portray the U.S. Military Favorably." But now it's on to Ed Smith's rom-coms. Rom-coms, of course, romantic comedies. And I had this idea. He actually highlights two movies here. The one that was a little bit more obvious as Pentagon Propaganda was Hallmark Channel's USS Christmas. But Netflix also put together a movie called Operation Christmas Drop. Secker goes through and explains how this is essentially just Pentagon propaganda. It portrays the military in a good light. It gives these companies unique access to U.S. military equipment in exchange for having, more control over the scripts and stuff like that. So, look, if you're scrolling through Netflix, I mean, I wouldn't really recommend watching these movies. They look pretty terrible to me. But you're scrolling through and you're sitting next to someone. Maybe if you got the article, it's a good chance to talk about how much the Pentagon is able to leverage its military equipment to Hollywood. So, we'll let you use our military equipment for real cheap. And in exchange, Hollywood gives, the Pentagon propaganda, portrays them in a good light. And so, of course, on Christmas, it's going to be like, oh, the, Army is so nice and they do so many great things. He points out that this seems to be directed at women, which is interesting because it really doesn't deal with the problem that women face in the military, like discrimination, but more importantly, sexual abuse and rape that occurs at very high levels. And it's just, they don't want you to think about that, so they're not going to show that aspect of it. In sense, they're giving you all the military equipment, they're not going to give you the military equipment to portray the military in a bad light. So that's how they inject the propaganda straight into your brains, by going straight to the movie or to the Pentagon to help them make their movies. All right, on to the next article here. This one by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. U.S. closing last two consulates in Russia. Dave DeCamp says move will leave U.S. Embassy in Moscow as the only U.S. diplomatic mission in Russia. So for the past at least 6 years, I would say, since probably Ukraine, the United States and Russia got into a little cycle where they're expelling each other's diplomats and closing consulates. And it looks like that led us to this point where the U.S. actually was only operating 3 diplomat missions in all of Russia. And now that is going to be down to 1, with 1 temporarily halting operations and another permanently closing. So maybe sometime in 2020, we're back up to 2. But this is not a great situation to have so little diplomacy between the 2 main nuclear superpowers. The other big concern I have, of course, is the new START treaty, which I've talked about over and over again, saying that this is the last remaining arms control agreement between Russia and the U.S. It's essential that this thing gets extended, and if there's not the established channels of diplomacy there, when we only have about 2 months left to save this treaty, it could end. And I mean, it would be awful. It looks like the U.S., with already having a $1 trillion plan to upgrade nuclear weapons, or I'm sorry, that might be about $2 trillion now, would likely just try to extend that. And, off to the, battle days of the Cold War, tens of thousands of nuclear bombs in each arsenal rather than just a couple thousand. Next article I have is from Reuters, and I think, again, I'm going to mostly tie this into the New START negotiations. And this is Biden's options for Russian hacking punishment, cyber, or sanctions. So this is what's happening. Joe Biden is the president-elect, and he's sitting there, and I don't know if this is him or all of his advisors, but they're all really concerned that Donald Trump isn't doing enough about Russia. Never mind that this alleged hack, as I went through on the last show with that Moon of Alabama article, in saying that, look, they still lack any evidence that Russia was actually behind these attacks, but they claim all the same that, it was Russia that did it, and now Trump, again, no evidence, but they say Donald Trump isn't punishing Russia enough, so Joe Biden is getting ready to lay some punishments. Now, Joe Biden will take office on January 20th. The New START treaty expires, I believe, February 5th. If he comes in and launches a cyber attack or sanctions against Russia, my guess is Russia's not also going to hold nuclear weapon talks at the same time. And so this seems like a death warrant for the New START treaty again, and he's just going half-cocked on information that doesn't show a legitimate Russian hack. You would think everybody would be concerned about actually having evidence and making sure after the 5 years of Russiagate being absolute nonsense, but nope, just continuing with the kind of same old Russia did it, and we have to punish them more, or else you are a puppet of Vladimir Putin. I can't believe how well that narrative set in with the Democrats, but there's still a lot of Democrats who believe that Republicans are just Putin's puppets. And I mean, look, these are aggressive actions, whether they're sanctions or a cyber attack, depending on what the cyber attack is. Could fight Russian retaliation. Of course, sanctions would probably be met with Russian sanctions or something like that. Again, I think the bigger concern is that despite the fact that you have Biden and people in his administration acknowledging that would be really important to extend the New START treaty, at the same time, they're going to engage in this, warfare, whether cyber or economic, with Russia, is going to really hamper the ability for talks. There's this article, I got it from MSN, but apparently it was initially a Bloomberg report. And it says, Biden seeks negotiate solution in Venezuela to end crisis. Sounds like a good headline, but when I got into the details of this article, I was pretty concerned that this isn't actually going to be a change from the Trump policy. Now, it could signal a change from the Trump policy, but I don't think that's a guarantee. It is because what Biden wants to do is talk with Maduro, which is good. I'm always in support of talking with foreign leaders, even if they're commies, and we're in, I guess, with Maduro, the U.S. has levied a lot of sanctions, so economic warfare against them. But if Biden could talk and see the Venezuelan perspective and lift sanctions, that's a good thing. But it says that Biden wants to push to end sanctions only in return for Venezuela holding free and fair elections. Now, there's a few problems with this. The first is that the U.S. election was a mess. Even if you really like Biden and support Biden and think that he legitimately won the election, I think it's pretty hard to deny that the U.S. election system has quite a few flaws to it, and that probably not the best time to go around refereeing other people's. The guy who just beat his dog probably shouldn't go lecture the neighbor about his grass being too long, right? That seems like the kind of situation that's going on here. But if you're going to say Venezuela has to have free and fair elections, in the past, that's just US imperial lingo that really means you have to put the person we want in power or we won't acknowledge that your elections are free and fair. I'm not sure what free and fair elections would even mean in a country like Venezuela, where it seems like Maduro has maybe even a majority of support in that country. And so if the election was like, if people were allowed to go vote and weren't afraid of repercussions, they may go and vote for Maduro anyways, for a couple reasons, because there aren't any good alternatives, and because at least they feel like they're going to get something from him, and then of course all the government propaganda and all that, right? So my guess is that even if there was no vote, like total rigging in Venezuela, even if there was no fear of people, if they voted for the opposition party, that the government's gonna crack down on them, or they're gonna be narked on, so whatever, people in communist countries are afraid of, right? I, it's all out there. But I think unless the party, the candidate that Biden and his administration wanted wins, then they're going to say that the elections weren't free and fair and not lift sanctions. And so essentially this is the same thing as the Trump policy, that Maduro must go and then we'll lift sanctions, which is obviously a non-starter. It hasn't worked in Iran, it hasn't worked in Cuba, it hasn't worked in North Korea, it hasn't worked in Syria. It's not going to work. The sanctions campaign. The other problem is that if Biden comes in, says he's going to take a softer policy, but really doesn't, I think then you end up with the political issue where it essentially tells people that, hey, you even had the softer Democrats come in and they couldn't make a deal with Maduro because he's just such a bad guy, that the next time a Republican comes in, it'll add fuel to their, well, we just had the war option point. I have this article from antiwar.com by Brett Wilkins, and it is a briefer summary of a pretty long story from The Intercept. I'll link to the Intercept article in the show notes page, but if people are interested in, you're not going to read a few thousand words, check out the Wilkins article at antiwar.com titled Investigative Report Detailing Massacres, Reign of Terror by U.S. Bat Death Squads in Afghanistan. So what happened is that the CIA bad death squads in Afghanistan, they go around just killing people and creating more members of the Taliban. And, that's kind of the start to end point of the Intercept article, which is we back really bad people in Afghanistan. Those really bad people kill people, including children. There's one case where they essentially go to a school and kill several sleeping, or I guess they woke up the boys, but they found 13 boys in a school that were killed by the CIA trained paramilitary force in Afghanistan known as Unit 01. And I think they detail Unit 01 through 04 in 4 different Afghan provinces, and all these different units have carried out similar kinds of atrocities. It's absolutely crazy that we go to Afghanistan and say we're there to build a nation. We bat people and they kill a school full of children, and we don't say, oh, we really don't understand Afghanistan, we can't do this. On top of all of it, some of these groups were also involved in the Afghan, I think it's like bocce boy practice or something, where they're essentially the warlords are able to take young boys as child sex slaves. And so all this is going on with these US bad units, and that's what we do. It's absolutely insane that this is who we're back in Afghanistan. This is what we feel the need to do when we go halfway around the world, is essentially bad people who kill innocent people and create more insurgents for the rest of the American forces to deal with. Last story I have on today's show is titled My mistake, that actually was the last article I had for the show today. I had to cover that on the last show about the U.S. supporting the Taliban with strikes in Afghanistan, which is just, crazy that not only are we backing, the people who are going around committing these atrocities, but are ostensibly supportive of the Afghan government that we back, but we're also supporting the people that these people are riding around and massacring with airstrikes against groups like the Islamic State Khorasan faction in Afghanistan. All right, guys, that's what I have for today's show. The news is usually a little light on Christmas week, so I'm guessing that the two shows I do this week will be a little bit shorter. Probably the same thing true of next week as well, and really until we get past the holidays and everybody gets back to work. The news stories seem a little bit lighter, but a lot of important stuff I think I covered on today's show, so share it if you can. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, support Paloma Verde, and I'll see you on Wednesday.